And you found that's better for you.
Exactly. I found that's better for me. And I'm totally focused on an animal-based diet with fruits. And I realized when I listened to your podcast the other day that I do still eat raspberries and dark chocolate, which I shouldn't, right?
Well, maybe you should. We can get into this because you went from a lifetime of eating a lot of oxalate, and there's no question that it ends up stored in your bones and your bone marrow and your tendons and your thyroid gland and your tissues. And so you got these dangerous little particles that the body has buried away. And when you go low enough in the diet, it gives the body permission to dig them out. And it can make you sick to be turning on inflammation and releasing oxalic acid back into the bloodstream and then having to pee it out or push it out through the mucus or the colon and the skin. Different people have different tendencies, but everyone ends up trying to use the kidneys to get it out of the blood. It's not safe for you to be releasing it in the blood. Yeah. And so by keeping some chocolate and raspberries in the diet, you may be getting enough that limits the amount that the tissues can put in the bloodstream because you're adding some to your bloodstream after these meals. And that tells the tissues there's not much room for more oxalate, and it helps them hold on to it. And that keeps your symptoms lower and helps you feel better.
Fascinating. So you shouldn't go from eating foods high in oxalates to eating nothing. You should lower it little by little.
Right. And you may need to keep some oxalates like tea or raspberries or chocolate around and vary it. You do it kind of casually. You don't eat on some kind of rigid way where you have to have raspberries every day or have chocolate. So it's variable enough, and that helps the body guessing about how much oxalate you're eating and whether it's safe to clean out your thyroid glands or your bone marrow too fast. And if that's enough to kind of, in most of us, to keep the pace of the recovery where the tissues are restoring their health and removing some of the oxalates from them at a level where it's not disrupting your life.
You mentioned tea. The only teas that I drink are actually herbal teas and a white tea. There's a white tea that's very low, very, very low in caffeine. What do you say? Are white teas, are they low in oxalates as well?
It's another type of the same variety of tea from black tea. So green tea, black tea, and white tea all have some oxalate in them, but none of the herbal teas have oxalates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We were talking about teas. So since the white tea, as you say, it comes from the same plant. It just depends on when you harvest the leaves, right? And since the white tea is like the sprouts from the tea plant, then it's supposed to have to be very low in caffeine, but also very low in oxalates. I learned, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. We'll confirm that data, and I'll get back to you on it to double check it because I can't memorize the data. But I know white tea is significantly less than the dark tea, and green tea is less only because you're using less leaves when you make the tea. So the amount of oxalate in your tea is really about how much tea leaves you use to brew it with.
The quantity. All right.
And white tea is probably one of those teas, again, where you use maybe a little bit less.
Can we test? Is there a test for oxalate overload? And how can you test if you have an oxalate overload?
So overload in your body, there's overload in your diet. You can tell if you're using worst offenders, you're overloading your diet. And if there's too much in your system because you're eating them routinely, it's a little bit hard to use what we call objective measures, blood tests, because the body doesn't leave oxalate in the bloodstream. It's too dangerous to have it there long. So you have a time after you eat the food, at about 4 hours later, you will see a spike in oxalate levels in the blood, but it won't last more than 8 hours, and it drops back down to normal. So you have to catch it right after meals to see it in the bloodstream. In the urine, same thing, only the body tends to release oxalate into the urine when you're not eating it because the body's holds it when it's coming in and it's high in the blood, although the kidneys can only handle so much. So the rest of the tissues may be holding on to it. And then when you stop the exposure, then you can get a wave later. So what we know from research done where a gentleman tested about 4,000 women, he tested every urine void through the day on 3 disconnected days. And he found that the total, if you had put it all in a 24-hour urine collection, which is standard in clinical medicine, it would not look that impressive as extremely high oxalate. But during the day, there was 2 or 3 spikes where the level of oxalate was off the charts high, which is really toxic for the kidneys and the bladder and the whole urinary tract. You're not necessarily going to catch that in the standard clinical test. But if you get a standard clinical urine test and you see high oxalates, that means you're high oxalate. You're overloaded with oxalate. And anybody who grew up in the modern era where you get potatoes, chocolate, nuts, sweet potatoes, and greens as a part of your regular life, or, peanuts are also popular worldwide, then you're overloaded with oxalate. You just may not have symptoms yet.
So how common is that? How common is oxalate overload, and why is it often overlooked?
Yeah, it's probably as common as are the foods, but we don't have the data. No one's asked the question. So without any numerator and denominator, and there's no fraction, there's no percentage that we can invent, I'm surprised. When I first started this, I thought, well, me and a few others are definitely going to get sick on eating these foods. So I'll just put out a little message. Hey, if you're like me and you're eating well, but you feel horrible, you ought to be looking at oxalate.
Want to learn more about oxalates? Check out Sally K. Norton's full interview. And if you're curious, dive into the other episodes too. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.